everyone, it's MK. Welcome back to MK Quilts. So today's video, once again, is a little bit of a departure from what I normally do with my YouTube and with my Sim Series videos. So basically the way that I use simulation is to preset my patterns, my quilt layouts, so that I can just step up to the machine and stitch. Well, what happens in the scenario of stitching a pantograph when what you've previously set up isn't exactly what you want? Well, that's kind of what happened on my most recent quilt. I did some specialty kind of cropping to get me over the hump of this little scenario that I had. So I'm going to take you inside a simulation, walk you through it, and then I'll meet you right back here. All right, everyone, let's get going and talk about the scenario with this pantograph that I was working on the other day when I posted in the group about why it was you thought that I had cropped this pantograph off in this manner. So basically what you're looking at on the screen currently is just a representation of the quilt that I had loaded. That's just a real simple little line drawing here. And then this is where I had cropped this pattern. Okay, we're going to come back to this in a second. But let me take you back and just talk to you a little bit about this pantograph in general. All right, so this is the pattern that I was using. It's called Curly Edge to Edge, and it's by Christy Dillon. This is a pattern of hers that I use quite frequently. And you can tell up in the top of the Pro Stitcher screen here, the default size on this pattern is 10 inches. Now for me personally, that's a little bit large. I like a little denser quilting. So I have taken this pantograph and I have set it up the MK way. Just clear this and open up the other one. So here is that pattern set up the way that I choose to set up pantographs. Now, just as kind of a note, I'm not going to go through the whole method of setting up this pantograph to look like it looks on the screen. If you want all that instruction, you can go to my website and rent my best practices for pantographs video. But basically, my general approach to pantographs is to set them up wider than I would ever be able to stitch them, and to a number of passes that's going to fit in my throat depth plus one extra. In my studio, because I have Infinity and Fusion, usually 2 passes of a pattern, sometimes 3, depending on how large the design is. But generally speaking, 2 passes and then 1 extra for repositioning. So the other thing you're going to notice about this pattern is that it is connected over here on the right hand side between rows 1 and rows 2. That is so that I can stitch my pantographs in both directions without having to address the machine at the end of the first pass. It'll just continue on and start stitching from right to left. Again, all of that instruction is in my best practices for pantographs. Now, I want to just show you, remember the master pattern of this design was 10 inches tall. And what I want to do for you really quickly is just show you that I had adjusted this pattern way back in the beginning when I set this up. I'm just going to do a modify crop, start and end, so that you can see that I had originally taken this pattern down to 9.43. Okay, so not a whole lot smaller than what it originally was, but it was still a little bit smaller. So if you multiply that together into the 2 passes, and let's go ahead and crop in the other direction so that you can see. So now I'm just moving my end point to the end of the first full pass, which is actually 2 rows. And again, I'm just going to do that modify crop. And what I'm doing here is just to explain to you that normally when I stitch this pattern in this manner, 2 passes is about 17.97, so 18 inches in total. And that will usually fit in my throat depth on Fusion. And Fusion was what I was using the day that I was stitching this pattern. However, the customer that I was working with, she liked this pattern, but she didn't want it that dense. Now, yes, I could have absolutely stopped and went back and adjusted this pattern and made it bigger and recreated it from step 1. I didn't want to do that. All I wanted to do was take the pattern I already had, lay it down on my quilt, and just make it slightly smaller so that it wasn't so densely quilted, so that my customer was happy. All right, let's just go ahead and hit undo. So I basically took this pattern and I dropped it down onto the quilt that I was working on. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to close this and then I'll pull up that other workspace again just so that I can show you. Okay, so basically what I did is I took this pattern, the master pattern that I had created, I opened it up at my machine and I did some cropping. Now, if you've watched my Pantos video, you know that basically I use this technique a lot for quilts that are not directional and patterns that are not directional. I just crop off into the batting because all that's going to get cut off anyways. It keeps my edges nice and flatly quilted, and it's just the method that I choose to use. And basically, it's very easy. You've got your quilt loaded. You bring your machine into position. You do a two-corner area over here. So we'll go back to, oops, go to area, do two corner, and then we go ahead and drag over to the other side, do another two corner. And basically, I'm going to just go ahead and close this pattern just to really quickly show you how I accomplish this. Let's select it off the workspace. Sometimes that's a little bit easier for me to select. Okay, so I'm just going to close that one. Okay, I'm just talking you through some things on how I accomplished that. So here's my main pattern that I had. I went ahead and I had resized it a little bit. Okay, so before I even went to crop it off, I had gone under Modify, Resize, and I had just resized the whole pattern. I think I might have taken it up to 29 or 30 inches in height. Okay, when I did that to that pattern, that made it so that those first two rows of this pass, which normally would fit, it made it so that it was too large to fit. Okay, so just kind of bank that information, and I had to address that in some manner so that I could get those two passes to stitch in my throat depth. Okay, I'm just going to kind of stop here. If you want to get the rest of how I address pantographs, you can watch the video. Basically, I just resized this, I placed it inside of my area box, and then I cropped off the edges. Okay, so again, let me just stop right there. I'm going to go ahead and clear this, and I'm just going to open up a different workspace. So let's open up this one. Okay, so after I did all of those steps, resizing the original pattern, marking my area, cropping off the edges, including the top, then I was ready to stitch. All right, so what I need you to do now is do a little bit of imagining. What you have to imagine is that I stitched out this first cropped pass, it went around, it stitched out the next pass. That was not an issue, okay? I was ready to advance now, so just kind of pretend we're advance, 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 advance. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this pattern just so that I can walk you through the next step. What you have to imagine is that that stitching is still there, okay? So of course, in simulation, when I close a pattern like that, the stitching is not left behind. Okay, so that's just a little piece of imagination. You have to imagine that that stitching is down here now. Okay, all right, so the next thing I did was I opened up my master pattern that I was using on this quilt. Again, this is the one that I had cropped off at the very beginning when I started the whole process. Okay, I have advanced. I have brought my machine back into position. I've opened up my pattern. This is the pattern that I'm going to use from now to the rest of my quilt. And I'm just going to go ahead and modify reposition. And I put it right on the start point. Okay, now here is where the problem came in. These first two passes now will not fit into my throat depth. And I knew that ahead of time. And if you practice the method like I do and you're at all unsure if your passes are going to fit in your throat depth, then basically what you're going to do is you're going to grab your machine, you're going to pull it down towards your rail, and you're going to look at your pattern on the monitor and make sure that your crosshairs are underneath the lowest part of the second pass. Okay, in my scenario, that was not the case. The lowest part of my second pass was going to hit my rail. Okay, so how was I going to approach that? I decided to just go ahead and move my stop point so that the machine would stop stitching and I could go ahead and advance. Okay, to do that, I just grabbed my machine. When I'm in simulation, I have to click the sim button, click, hold, and drag. That simulates that I'm moving my machine. Okay, so I moved my machine over here to the end. All right, once I got over here, I basically just picked a spot that was going to be about in the middle, maybe a little bit more towards the top of what is the second pass. I went into Pro Stitcher. I'm going to pick a new start and end. Actually, I'm going to pick just the end. Stop auto on, stop auto off. And then what I did was I just fine-tuned it a little bit. And I wanted to just make sure that my stop point, this new stop point where I wanted to do my cropping, was going to end up out into the batting. Okay, so I just fine-tuned that just a little bit. Oh, went a little too far. There we go. Okay, now here's the thing, you guys. I wouldn't have necessarily even had to crop this off. I could have just left my stop circle there, let the machine stitch, and it would have stopped at that point right there. But the other thing that I was afraid that was going to happen was I was going to run out of bobbin thread and I would have to create a new start point to finish out the pass. I am also aware of that at the time of this videotaping, we're still having a little bit of a glitch with stop circle when we're working in Pro Stitcher. So I didn't want to lose that stop point. All right, so I thought, well, I don't want to lose it. How about I just crop? Then I know for certain that I'm not going to lose that mark. All right, so we do that under Modify, Crop, and we're just going to crop using Start and End. Now I was certain that my machine would stop there. Okay, so let's just watch this stitch out a little bit here closer to the end. I'm just going to start my simulator somewhere over here close to the end here, and we'll just let it run until it reaches that stop circle, and then I'll explain how I advanced and got myself going again. All right, there we go. All right, so that part of the pass was done. Now, because of the size of these two passes once hooked together, because the size was just slightly larger than my throat depth, I really didn't have to advance all that much to get the final portion of the pass to fit. So that meant that I only had to advance a very small distance. I didn't even have to unclamp the sides. Okay, so I just advanced just a little bit. Okay, so once again, just kind of imagine that you're advancing. Now, under modify reposition, I could have absolutely done drag and drop. Okay, but I didn't press the drag and drop. I left my needle in the quilt. I advanced very carefully, so use your imagination. Advance, advance, advance just a little bit. And then what I did to make certain that I was in correct position is I hit this button, current start point. Okay, that's right where my crosshair is, so I'm just going to do current. And that assured me that I was now in position after I had done my slight advance. Well, now I need to get the rest of my pattern back in here. Easiest way for me to do that was to go back under Edit, History, and go down to where I had cropped it. Okay, so let's go to right here. Okay, there was my start point, or I'm sorry, my stop circle. And just because I'm not 100% sure, just as I'm looking at this in simulation, that I would have been in position at that point, because remember, I had used history and I had gotten back to a point where I was in a slightly different position. So I'm going to once more go ahead and do modify, reposition right on that current start point, and now I am assured that I'm in position. Well, now I need to get started at that point. I don't want it to be a stop circle. I want it to be a start circle. So I'm going to go into Pro Stitcher, New Start and End. I'm going to make that, rather than the stop digit, I'm going to move that digit over here. So 8, 3, 3, 2. I'm going to move my stop circle all the way to the end by using my little down arrow. Okay, now I'm on my very last stop circle. That's what I want. And I can just continue on. I'm going to go under Pro Stitcher Quilt. Having a pull up is fine. I'm out in the batting and I'm just going to go ahead and proceed. Okay, now it's just going to continue to stitch on from right to left, and the rest of that pass that wasn't previously fitting is going to fit into my throat depth. Okay, you guys, so that whole explanation may seem like a little involved, and you may be thinking, gosh, MK, why didn't you just create the thing from scratch? And that would have been an absolutely fine, answer to my problem. But because I like to have my pantos connected on the side and all that, I just really didn't want to take the time to do that. I just wanted to use the pattern. I wanted to make a slight adjustment. I knew that if I moved my stop circle, I could accomplish it. I knew if I took that one step further and did some cropping, that I would be super safe with that stop point. I knew that if I advanced just a little bit, repositioned myself on that spot, brought the pattern back in, and continued on, I would be golden. Now, the thing about with this quilt, you guys, it was a small quilt, and I really only had to do that cropping business once. Okay, if this had been a king size quilt and I wanted to use this pattern and I wanted it to be larger, I would not have wasted the time every time I needed to advance to do this little cropping trick. It was because I wanted a small fix, it was a small quilt, and I knew I could accomplish it. So the point of this video is to get you thinking a little bit outside the box. First of all, maybe you want to try setting up pantos the MK way and rent my pantos video. Second thing I just want to mention, and I've talked about it several times before, is understanding start and stop points and repositioning on those points. If you can get that into your head and understand start and stop points and repositioning, you will be transformed in the way that you quilt in your studio. Okay, I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, reach out to me. Thanks for, putting in your input on that post on the Pro Stitcher Sim Style group. If you're not a member of that group because you're catching this on YouTube, hop on over to Facebook, search for Pro Stitcher Sim Style, and I would be happy to have you in the group. All right, you guys, until next time, it's MK. Bye-bye. All right, so there you have it. Now the video and the explanation may seem like it took kind of a long time, but really that whole process for me was very quick once I got to the quilt. I knew I needed to resize that pattern. I knew that I was not going to have enough throat depth. I really didn't want to reset it. So I just made an alternate plan to stop the machine over on the end, advance a little bit, and then continue on. I just took that one extra step further with a little bit of cropping just to ensure that the machine was going to stop. So you know what? It's an option. Would I necessarily set my pantograph up to do exactly that? No, but it was a way for me to adapt what I had already set up. It took just a split second to do over there at the right side of the machine, and then it continued along. So maybe it's an option for you on your next quilt where you're stitching a pantograph that's not quite gonna fit in your throat depth. All right, you guys, thanks for joining me, and as always, from my studio to yours, happy quilting. Bye-bye.